If you look at what's happened over the last 8 weeks and compare that really to what's happened over the last 8 years, you'll see there's a tremendous difference.
President Trump highlighting what he says is an end to the micromanaging of the military by President Obama with what he believes are better results. And it's time now for our Sunday group. Michael Needham, head of the conservative think tank Heritage Action for America. Bob Woodward from the Washington Post. Fox News national security correspondent Jennifer Griffin, and former National Security Council staffer Gillian Turner. Well, Jennifer, let me start with you. What do your sources say over the last 24 hours about this impressive display of military hardware by the Kim regime in Pyongyang, and also that launch, yes, failed, but still a launch of a missile in defiance of President Trump?
Well, I think what's notable, Chris, is when I walked out of the Pentagon on Friday afternoon, it was a pretty relaxed atmosphere over at the Pentagon. You didn't see the president travel down to Mar-a-Lago with his war cabinet, if you will. He did not have his defense secretary with him. He did not have H.R. McMaster with him, his national security advisor. They had plans in place to react. They know that North Korea has not tested an ICBM, an intercontinental ballistic missile that could reach the U.S., so they had different scenarios. The bottom line is, I think if you look at General Mattis's statement, it was 22 words in length, very short, very terse, to the point, and he said the president would have no more comment. And what they're pointing out is that that was a medium-range missile. It failed, it fizzled, they've kind of been snickering about it. And in terms of the parade, we're not really sure what we saw in that parade. I remember when I was a Moscow correspondent that we learned decades after we saw those parades in Moscow that many of those missiles that we believed at the time during the Cold War were in fact fake. So I think we don't know what we saw at that parade.
Gillian, as someone who worked in the Bush 43 White House and the National Security Council, and also the Obama National Security Council, we have a question from a viewer about how President Trump should handle Kim. Let's put it up on the screen. George Valentine tweeted this: I believe he, Mr. Trump, needs to come across very strong that we will not play games with North Korea. How do you answer, George? And I have to say that I'm feeling a little whipsawed, because this week it seemed that the administration was building up what's going to happen this week and how is the U.S. going to respond, and President Trump saying, if they don't solve it, we will. And now we're told, well, this is just part of the game.
So I think that Secretary Mattis's statement, while frustrating to us as eager viewers of the administration at this point, is actually right on the money in terms of tone and tenor. The bigger context here, despite the fact that the tension with North Korea has kind of reached this rhetorical and optics apex over the weekend, is that this sort of covert, I hesitate to call it a covert war, but sort of a covert war between the United States and North Korea has been simmering for the past 3 years. We maybe only heard snippets of it during the second term of President Obama, because he didn't want it to be a centerpiece of his foreign policy, but it's been there all along. And I think that, I can't speak for the Trump administration, obviously, but I imagine that they're trying to, while not normalize this type of behavior from the North Koreans, make people understand that every time they test a missile now, it doesn't pose a sort of existential crisis for the United States. And that's the kind of steadying hand we've been hoping to see from the president all along. So I think that we should actually welcome it.
Bob, you interviewed candidate Trump a year ago, and at that time he said to you, real power is fear. Do you think that unleashing the military the way he has in the last couple of weeks, and making a point of saying we're not micromanaging the Pentagon the way Obama did, and I will say top Pentagon officials I talked to complained about that micromanaging by the Obama team, do you think that sends the right message to both our allies and our enemies?
It's a very different message, and as you may recall, President Obama, his first inaugural, he said American strength comes from our humility and restraint. You're smiling because that's not the way the world is, and
it's also not the watchword of this administration.
It is not, and I think Trump means that when he did a year ago say that real power is fear. In North Korea, the reality is none of the options are very good. President Trump talks repeatedly. He wants to win. He likes to win. The military likes to win. the military options in North Korea, as you suggested, you have some sort of preemptive strike engagement. Seoul, Korea gets devastated. There is no win. And so what you need to do is be tough, try to deter, and see if you can work something out. But we get into a military engagement in North Korea, and that's going to be hell.
There was a striking flip on Russia this week. In addition, there's a lot of stuff going on every week in this administration. After talking for months about getting along or trying to get along with the Putin regime and the Kremlin, a dramatic change in tone from the president this week, and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov fired back. Here that is.
Putin is backing a person that's truly an evil person. And I think it's very bad for Russia. I think it's very bad for mankind.
This fixation on trying to oust this or that dictator, an authoritarian or totalitarian leader, is well known to us, and we know how it ends.
Michael, what do you make of this dramatic shift this week away from Putin and towards Chinese President Xi?
I thought the most interesting contrast was between Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and actually Rex Tillerson, who was over in Russia. He was cool, he was calm, he was firm. And I think the Trump administration is developing a very clear-eyed view of what the Russians are. They're a strategic adversary of the United States. Vladimir Putin is a former KGB thug who's trying to relive those glory days. And because Russia hasn't fully integrated into the global marketplace, it is very much a zero-sum relationship between the United States and Russia. That's different from China. There are opportunities with China for us to form a strategic partnership. We shouldn't mistake that without also recognizing that China is also a competitor. And as we look at China, we look at things they can do with us in North Korea, we don't have to be enemies with China, but we also can't be friends as long as they continue to steal our intellectual property, as long as they continue to take advantage of our trade agreements and express real military aggression in the South China Sea.
But Gillian, and briefly, that's a 180-degree turn from what this president was saying 2 weeks ago about China and Russia.
It is. It's 180 degrees, and from my perspective, it's a welcome turn. I mean, there's flip-flopping and then there's flip-flopping. I think what we're seeing here is more of a sort of an evolution. We're watching the president navigate the Russian relationship in real time, and I think he's learning very quickly on this very steep, treacherous learning curve that dealing with Vladimir Putin as a potential sort of businessman is very different than dealing with him as a foreign head of state, and that's what we're seeing.
All right, panel, we have to take a break here.